one shield throw on a specific void build for infinite explosions and overshields, one button press on a specific strand build to become invincible in a Grandmaster Nightfall, and 5 more, totaling 7 Titan builds you need to try. Now, starting out with build number 1, we've got the Void subclass using Second Chance Gauntlets. With this exotic, a simple shield throw can stun a barrier champion in one hit while also applying a weakening debuff, which makes your other weapons deal more damage to them. The build revolves all around constant debuffs, void explosions, overshields, and non-stop health regen just for killing stuff. The first piece comes from the controlled demolition aspect, which makes any enemy hit by a void ability become volatile. This particular debuff looks like a purple ball on them, and after taking some extra damage, it'll explode. The cool thing is that explosion passes that debuff along, making everyone else volatile too. It becomes a wicked chain reaction as you go along, and the cherry on top is that you and your team both get health back whenever you're near it. Now, the beauty here is that it all synergizes with your shield throw. You toss it out, it'll tag a bunch of enemies, you get an overshield back based on how many things it hits, and not only that, it'll make them volatile, so there's explosions everywhere. That weakening debuff I mentioned in the beginning, that's where this comes in, because everything it'll hit also takes 15% more damage now. They'll move slower, and they're even less accurate shooting back at you. To expand on the overshield section a bit, when you have one active, your second aspect will come into play, which is Offensive Bulwark. This gives you way faster grenade regen, makes your melee have extended reach dealing more damage, and best of all, converts it into a powered one. What this means is it counts as an ability, which applies volatile, and it'll create an orb on every punch when you pair it with the heavy-handed mod. Going back to the grenade for a second, not only is the regen boosted with that overshield, we can make it even crazier with something called Devour. For anyone new, Devour is a buff that gives you full health and grenade back on every single kill. All it takes to activate is picking up an orb, and then once you have it, every single kill and picking up other orbs will refresh the timer on the left-hand side. Because of how easy that is on this build and the fact that you get instant full health, you can play super aggressive. With those grenades we're spamming out, because we're running the Echo of Provision fragment, it'll supercharge your melee regen while that grenade is dealing damage. The Vortex Grenade is great for this because it deals damage over a long period of time, and with the Second Chance exotic giving you 2 melees to begin with, you end up with an amazing loop between the two. Now, we're not quite done there, because when you get a kill with the grenade, the Echo of Instability fragment kicks in, which converts your void weapons to shoot volatile rounds. If you think about that for a second, it's like every bullet is an ability now, applying that purple explosion debuff to everyone. Rounding things off on this would be a couple weapon perks that synergize with everything. Repulsor Brace is an example that also applies that volatile debuff we just talked about, which helps bridge the gap whenever the fragment hasn't given it to you. I strongly recommend it on a machine gun, it's unbelievable. And then the second thing to look for is anything with Pugilist, because that'll give you huge chunks of melee back on your kills. It's really good on shotguns and fusion rifles with this. Build number 2 pairs an exotic called Surfshark on the Void subclass using their VPN as a bubble, which is the sponsor of today's video. This is something I believe everyone should be using, and they've got a 30-day refund deal right now to try it out, plus a free 3-month bonus when you sign up. What do I mean by Surfshark VPN? Well, doing anything online causes a direct flow of information between you and the internet that unfortunately outsiders have access to. What a VPN does is encrypt all of that to block them. Surfshark is an app that can go on your computer, your phone, and even works for smart TVs to do exactly that. It's like an on-off switch for any of your devices whenever you want, and a side benefit is that it protects your IP address from being public, which stores your location. Just the other day, for example, I wanted to watch Joker, but it's not offered in Canada. With Surfshark having over 3,000 servers in 100+ countries, I can flick that on switch to be based out of Australia, which is a country that Netflix does offer Joker. All I gotta do is hit refresh, and then bam, there it is. Go to surfshark.deals/castle, and please don't ever use airport Wi-Fi without this again. The next build is so ridiculous because of some of the changes that happened when you combine the Strand subclass with the Stronghold exotic. Bungie brought us a new aspect that did it, and this build revolves around unbelievable damage resistance, buffing your damage to stupid amounts, all of which comes with constant healing for you and your teammates. We'll kick things off explaining that new aspect, Banner of War. It's this huge green flag sprouting out of your back that sends out these healing pulses with damage boosts, by the way, in a 10-meter radius for you and your teammates. To get that thing on your back, you have 5 different ways to activate it. Killing something with a sword, a melee, a glaive, your super, or even a finisher. When you do that, a timer pops up on the left-hand side, but if you or any of your allies get kills, not only does it extend that timer, it'll also speed up how frequent those pulses are going off with a maximum stack of 4. At 1 stack, each pulse is 20 HP every 2.5 seconds, but it gets faster and faster while also providing damage buffs that I've listed on screen. If we pay attention to the melee, for example, that's pretty special because it stacks with a 1-2 punch shotgun. That in itself is super fun, but we haven't even talked about the exotic, so let's dig into what the Stronghold does. These gauntlets are all about swords, which we've just learned directly kicks off your new Strand aspect getting sword kills. Their exotic perk lets you go invincible just by holding down a button. So blocking with your sword, it prevents you from losing sword energy, and you take up to 95% less damage on shots you block. You can literally sit in front of a GM boss, hold down block, and kick your feet up thanks to this exotic. Even shots that come at you from behind are at half damage, so think of it as like an infinite glaive shield, but for the heavy slot. Something I want you to notice is that while blocking with your sword, you're building these stacks called Perfect Guard. When you have any stacks of this at all, your next sword hit is going to give you a souped up version of that restoration buff. I can block even just a single bullet with this thing, and then it'll activate 4 seconds of restoration. But the more you block, the more the stacks go up, the more time you get, up to 16 full seconds of restoration. It's an amazing thing being able to proc that solar healing but on Strand, and the synergy between Stronghold buffing you with a sword to then activate Banner of War for you and your whole team is just silly. I personally think Lament is the best sword for this build because that exotic heals you on its hits as well, which, believe it or not, stacks with restoration and the healing pulses from Banner of War. Focusing on Strand, you can basically throw out these suspending grenades that stop enemies from fighting you. You can use your beefed up melee thanks to the aspect to get kills. Anything you kill that's been affected by Strand abilities will make a tangle. You can grab those things and either throw it at yourself or your buddies to activate Woven Mail for further damage resistance, or if you feel like using it for damage, you can do that too because tagging enemies with it gives you a ridiculous amount of melee back thanks to the threat of Fury Fragment. Something I need to mention is that at the very beginning, you might feel awkward getting hyper tunnel vision with your sword. Because of how strong it is, you can end up forgetting to just play the game as you always would. So you're better off just remembering that you have this unstoppable option in your back pocket that can survive anything whenever you want. Or hey, don't forget about Black Talon. That'll actually proc your Restoration and Banner of War from a distance. Alright, now I can't make a Titan video without talking about hammers, so this one uses the Synthoceps on Solar. If you've ever heard of the Bonk build, this is it, and it revolves all around that mini hammer and a powerful healing buff. When you kill something with it, or with any of your abilities, it'll make a sunspot thanks to the Soul Invictus aspect. Entering that little fire spot gives you faster ability regen, but more importantly, a healing buff called Restoration. It's insanely strong, like constant healing while you're under fire. It's not just a little bump. Now that ability kill also gives you something called Roaring Flames on the left-hand side. That buff will stack up to 3 times, making your abilities deal nearly double their damage. This is great because our hammer's getting more and more powerful, but those are rookie numbers because we can turn that up to an 11 pairing it with the Synthoceps exotic. What that does is being near 3 enemies gives you bionic enhancements, which triples your melee damage and stacks with Roaring Flames. You can plow through a crowd of enemies like nothing, and since both of those buffs stay active for a bit, you can enter the next fight just as strong. One more amazing thing is that all of these huge buffs will stack with any debuffs applied, so you can literally delete a champion. Now with how powerful this is, it can be easy to get tunnel vision, so let's talk about the healing part. Each hammer kill makes a sunspot, right? And each sunspot gives you restoration. Well, because you're running the Ember of Empyrean fragment, solar kills will extend the timer on that incredible healing. And when I say solar, I'm talking abilities or weapons. The synergy between damage and healing is so strong that we double down adding Ember of Torches to the mix. That makes it so that every hammer hit activates Radiant, which means a 25% boost to your weapon damage when you're not using your hammer. One tip for you is that if the hammer misses, like I said, we can get tunnel vision pretty easily. Don't act like you're Tom Hanks dealing with Wilson. Wilson! Wilson! Just play as normal until the hammer's back if you've lost it. The second tip is that you'll want to separate your keybinds for charged and uncharged melees. It can be done on both PC and console, and it just makes sure that when you're up close to an enemy, you can choose to use your hammer instead of the automatic melee. Literally between all of that and a blinding grenade launcher with some healing grenades, congratulations, you can now solo every dungeon in the game. Sticking with one more solar, we've got the Ashen Wake exotic. This build revolves around throwing out these mini nuke grenades, setting the world on fire, and letting everyone know that you never skip arms day. The first thing to know is that thanks to your exotic gauntlets, your fusion grenades are going to detonate instantly. The key with this whole thing is that using your grenade gets your grenade right back. If you throw it at a group of enemies, you're either getting most or all of its energy refilled because it depends on what you kill. I want you to think of it as 4 units, so killing 4 basic red bars and you would get it back. Kill 2 yellow bars and you'd also get it back. A mini boss, for example, counts as all 4 units, so just one of them would do it. Because your ability kills give you roaring flames just like the last build, your grenades will deal more and more damage each throw. So with that snowballing buff being similar to before, let's talk about how things heal you on this one. First of all, every single grenade kill is going to give you a bit of health thanks to the Ember of Resolve fragment. The second piece is that you're running Soul Invictus again, so your grenades are now going to be giving you that restoration healing buff. What I didn't mention last build is that killing scorched enemies also creates sunspots thanks to this aspect. The term scorched is just a fancy word that Bungie chose for basically being on fire, and the reason it matters is that your grenades will do that. When you throw it, even if it doesn't kill on impact, the explosion will spread scorch to nearby enemies, which you can then kill however you want to just create the sunspots anyways. It can be worth staying in those sunspots, by the way, for a little bit because of how fast your ability cooldowns get, but we still run Ember of Empyrean to easily refresh those timers with solar kills after you've left them. Now, to get a little technical with the whole scorch thing, when an enemy gets lit on fire multiple times, they can actually burn up to the point where they ignite. That's another fancy Bungie term for an explosion. So if you hit someone with multiple abilities, it'll apply scorch multiple times, which can then cause an ignition. This could be 2 grenades, a shoulder charge and a grenade, a shoulder charge followed up by a base melee, or heck, even just 3 base melees. Speaking of shoulder charge, by the way, it's got a neat little trick where you can actually go straight to the ignition point if you get a kill with it, which is a pretty nice bonus. Let's say you hit someone and it doesn't kill them though, it's still great because it spreads scorch to a surrounding area. I actually like to do that sometimes on a larger enemy followed by a regular melee because of how the whole scorch and ignition thing works anyways. To wrap things up with weapons, we're going to stick with setting the world on fire, and that's with the incandescent perk. Getting a kill with that on a weapon also applies Scorch, so you can imagine how strong it fits here. But another great idea is Demolitionist. Because that gives you grenade energy on kills, it helps bridge any cooldown gaps that you might run into. Solar weapons are obviously great for extending those timers we talked about, so things like the explosive personality waveframe, solar machine guns are great, xenophage, even Gjallarhorn sometimes. I'd say an honorable mention goes to a 1-2 punch shotgun since it buffs your shoulder charge. Like, there's a lot of options you have on this build. This next one takes the Strand subclass and cranks it up using the Abeyant Leap exotic. This build revolves around suspending everything around you, getting something called Woven Mail, and making combat like shooting ducks in a barrel. When you suspend a target by any means, Abeyant Leap gives you Woven Mail, which is a 55% damage resist. Just like that, enemies will deal less than half their damage to you, and you can do it on command by popping your barricade. It sends out 3 tracking waves which go a really good distance, and between that and your shackle grenade, you can pretty much suspend everything in sight when you want. Looping that effect is already easy enough at base, but then we run the Thread of Generation fragment, which turns any damage you deal into grenade energy. I'm going to repeat that just so it's abundantly clear. Any damage, I'm talking weapons, abilities, anything at all, will return your grenade. We add some mods to the mix like Utility Kickstart, Insulation, and Bolstering Detonation, all of which give you barricade energy back to completely fill any remaining gaps, letting you pop that thing over and over. We capitalize on that by using Bomber to give us our Shackle Grenade back, and then a cherry on top is with the powerful Attraction mod, you can pick up all nearby orbs too. The cycle becomes really strong because everything you do feeds into that loop, allowing you to keep suspending targets infinitely. Now, I do want to talk about the melee because people forget it can also be used for movement. You can get out of some tough situations pretty quickly considering you have 3 of them, so whether it's dodging incoming attacks or if you want to spam it on an enemy, that works too, just don't forget you have it. The super is underrated as well, doing a ton of damage even up to the GM level, so make sure you spam that thing every time you get it. And some people view this as one of Destiny's strongest support builds because of how straightforward that loop is, allowing you to go at whatever pace that you want. That being said, because all of your abilities are built around suspending enemies, the weapons you pick to kill them right after are very important. Of course, every activity is going to dictate what you choose to use. You just want to make sure you have some heavy hitting options. For having some fun and basic content, I love to run the Quicksilver Storm exotic in the first slot. I like to use a machine gun to mow them down really quickly. And then in the middle slot, I really want something with good burst damage, whether it's a shotgun or a fusion rifle. When you suspend a champion, the time that they're in the air is actually shortened by comparison, so you want to hit them as quick as you can. Stuff like rockets or heavy grenade launchers end up being really useful for higher end content, and then other than that, a waveframe GL is always going to be great for ad clear. Stasis with the Crest of Alpha Lupi chest piece, a big time sleeper for Titans. This build lets you cover a map with crystals, have constant healing, and never-ending armor charges. When popping a barricade, the Alpha Lupi exotic heals both you and your teammates, giving you a chance to double down on survivability throughout your gameplay. When you destroy a crystal, it's going to supercharge your grenade regen by up to 500%. It shows improved ability regen on the left-hand side with a timer that you can refresh. Because of our tectonic harvest aspect, destroying a crystal is also going to make these things called stasis shards. By default, these give you melee energy when picking them up, but we double down on that running the Whisper of Rhyme fragment. That'll give you health on every one of them, or even an overshield if you happened to be full health already. Going one step further, we use 2 more mods to juice these up. First is Elemental Charge. That makes it so that shards you pick up convert into armor charges. It takes 4 of them to make 1 charge at base, but we run stacks on stacks to work around this, making each charge count as 2. Essentially, this allows you to get 2 armor charges from just 1 set of crystals, which is huge. Spawning those crystals isn't just from your Glacier Grenade either. They can come from your melee as well, because we're going to be running the Howl of Storm aspect. Simply press the melee button while sliding and it'll summon a wall of crystals that'll give you all the same benefits that we just ran through. And thanks to the shards coming from all those crystals, you have what feels like infinite armor charges. Because of this, we're going to be running weapon surges to give you a solid damage boost more frequently. To be very clear, you don't even need an enemy to get this loop going either. The fact that you can break crystals on command for a damage boost on your weapons is massive. Coming back to the barricade though, why is it so special for Stasis? Well, of course the healing with Lupi is great, the orb pickups are nice, but it can also destroy a whole ice wall in one shot. Just like that, because the shards are right there, you're now full health if you were weak, or have an overshield if you weren't, and you're back up on your armor charges without having to sacrifice cover. Another tip I find people don't know is that throwing the nade or slide melee at the bottom of your barricade will also explode it right on impact. The ease in breaking crystals quickly is what makes everything play so nicely and what this build is all about. But if you're wondering what weapons to run, here are some recommendations. I sound like a broken record, but waveframe GLs yet again are great here because those things can just slap on the ground right after you throw out some crystals and blow them up, plus the enemies around it. The Parasite exotic is super fun with how easily it charges up on this build. And then finally, Demolitionist, again, is a great perk because getting kills refill your grenade energy, letting you to spam more and more ice walls that we love so much. Playing this with other Titans running the same build is so ridiculous, I sometimes feel like my game is going to crash just on how much is going on. Moving on to the Arc subclass, we have the Heart of Inmost Light exotic. It's got a funny history because it went from being the most popular one out there to people thinking it died when Lightfall shipped. I will explain how wrong that is, and it revolves around excellent ad clear, looping burst damage, and playing faster than ever. The first part of what makes the build work comes from the Pulse Grenade, which is boosted by the Touch of Thunder aspect. It makes your grenade create these things called ionic traces. There are these white lines on the ground that track to you, and when they reach you, they give you ability energy back. These will get made every couple seconds that our grenade is hitting a target, and because we're making our grenades last longer with Spark of Magnitude, you get way more traces throughout your gameplay. It's really huge because when you're hitting a bunch of enemies or even just one really big one, the traces can help you get a full grenade back. Another layer to those nades is that when you do hit a target with one, they get a debuff applied to them called Jolt. This makes it so that when they take further damage, an electric burst happens tagging nearby enemies. You end up with a lot of chain damage to boatloads of adds all the time, and if that wasn't enough, a grenade's Jolt will also stun an Overload champion. To get nerdy for a second, it isn't the jolt that stuns them, but it's taking damage while jolted, so that's why grenades are so good for this. Because we have them so frequently, you run Ashes to assets for your super to Thunder Crash like there's no tomorrow. Now that was a lot about grenades because of how strong pulses are, but here's where the HOIL exotic comes in alongside the use of Thruster instead of Barricade. To first explain the exotic, when you use one of your abilities, the other two get a buff, which is shown on the left hand side. If I use my Thruster, which is on a very short cooldown by the way, it'll buff my grenade and melee. Using my grenade will buff the melee and thruster, and then of course using my melee will buff the grenade and thruster. So what do I even mean by buff? Well, at 1 stack, it's 400% faster charge rates on both grenade and melee, 25% for thruster. At 2 stacks, that actually doubles. So for instance, I can use a thruster followed by grenade and you'll see 2x on screen. I've put up a table for you so you can screenshot it if you want, because there's even a damage buff included here, but the key is just how fast you get everything back. Using one helps the other, then using that helps the next, then using that helps this one. Like, it's just an infinite loop at all times. The whole beauty around the build is that because of how strong all of that is, you can play hyper aggressive. Tacking on the elemental attraction mod, you can pick up all nearby orbs every time you use the thruster while you're cruising around. I recommend this to a lot of people starting out on Titan because it doesn't really matter what order you do things in either. Like, yes, there's an optimal way, but just go around. You can shoulder charge something, instantly dodge away before they stomp at you, throw a grenade, re-up it with thruster, like so on and so forth. Here's the mod screen tying it all together, and with one more build, I actually made its own video just to explain how powerful Void Synthos can be doing something like this. Click the thumbnail on screen for that one, and thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Their links are in the description for you to try out with my code.